Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Praptasya Kalyana Gurnanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Praptasya Kalyana Gurnanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Mahaprabhu ki Tananitya Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasura Sena Ramancha Kampasu Taranga Vajo Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shri Vigrara Dana Nityanana Shringaratanama Dhiramarjanadu Shri Yuktasya Bhaktamsya Niyunjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Yuktasya Bhaktamsya Niyunjatopi Vande Guru Chaturvidha Shri Bhagavat Prasado Swatmana Triptan Hare Bhakta Sangam Kridvaiva Trupti Vajato Shadeva Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Radhikama Davayara Param Madhura Leela Guna Rupanam Shri Radhikama Davayara Param Madhura Leela Pratikshana Danalalupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Ne Kunjayuno Ratikeri Siddhai Jajali Dhiri Jukti Apekshaniya Nikunjayuno Ratikeri Siddhai Jajali Dhiri Jukti Apekshaniya Tatrati daksha Oti valabhasya Vande Gurashi Charanaravindo Tatrati daksha Oti valabhasya Vande Gurashi Charanaravindo Sachadharitena Samasta Shashri Pruktastatha Bhavyata eva sadave Sachadharitena Samasta Shashri Pruktastatha Bhavyata eva sadave Into Prabodha Priya eva tasya Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Prasada Bhagavat Prasada Yasya Prasadam Nagati Kutapi Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada Yasya Stuvam tasya yasatrin sanyam Vande Gurashi Charanaro Vrindam Vande Gurashi Charanaro Vrindam Vande Gurashi Charanaravinda Nama Om Krishna Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Patata Satarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, oh, Hare Krishna, oh, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, oh, Hare Rama, oh, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Nama Krishna Jadavaya Nama, Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Nama, Gopal Govindaram Shri Madhusudan, Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan, Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Sita, Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata Gita, Shri Rupa Sanatan Vattaraguna, Gopala Bhatta Dasaraguna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Haribo, Haribo, Nitai Gaur Haribo. Haribo, Nitai Gaur. Jaya Vishwapara Paramahansa Prabhajaka Sutara Sarasi Shimar. His Divine Grace, Abhacharvina Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON Pratishtha Bhivati Samstapakacharya Vaishnava Siramani, Parit Pavana Srila Prabhupada Ji Maharaj Ki Jai, Shri Gaurya Guru Vargapati Udhari Ki Jai, Shri Rup Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Guna Sadgoswami Prabhu Ki Jai, Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Kuri Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai, Jai Param Dayal Shri Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai, Premanama Sankirtane Ka Janaka Prima Purushottama Shri Sachinandana Shriman Gauranga Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaur Hari Mahavrana Avatar Ki Jai, Golokera Pramadhan Harinama Sankirtan Jaga Ki Jai, Yoga Dharma Hare Krishna Mahamantra Ki Jai, Brihat Mridanga Transcendental Book Distribution Seva Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gop Gupna Radha Kun Sama Kun Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai, Shri Vrajabhim Vrindavan Mathura Dham Ki Jai, Teloshp Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai, Shri Shri Maya Purnama Dvipika Chakra Dham Ki Jai, Paramakarun Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai, Shri Purushottam Kitra Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Shri Gannath Swami Baladev Prabhu Smaspatari Devi Surasan Chakra Bhagavan Ki Jai, Bhakti Sarva Vigna Vinashna Kani Shingare Bhagavan Ki Jai, Shri Ram Lakshman Bhaktanuman Ji Ki Jai, Jaganga Maya Jamuna Maya Ki Jai, Tulsi Maharani Prindi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Shri Mathura Dharani Ki Jai, Shamaveta Bhakta Vindi Ki Jai, Nitai Gaura Pramanandi. All glories to Assembly Bodies. All glories to Assembly Bodies. All glories to Assembly Bodies. All glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Shri Guru Shri Gauranga.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Dala Dadaine Hiranyakashipurvakshaha Shilatanka Nakhalaye
Shilatanka Nakhalaye
To Narasimha Parato Narasimha
Ito Narasimha Parato Narasimha
Yeto Yeto Yamitato Narasimha
Jato Jato Yamitato Narasimha
He Narasimha Hrudaye Narasimha Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapadhe
Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapadhe
Tava Kara Kamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Shranga Dalita Hiranyakasipu Tanu Brunga Keshavadrita वृषवद्रिता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
जय केशवदेता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
जय नरसिंहदेव 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 जय नरसिंहदेव
जय नृसिंहदेव 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 जय नृसिंहदेव
जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज
जय प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद
जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद
जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद
जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव
जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव जय श्री श्री भक्तिपथ सर्वज्ञ विनाशन कनिष्ठहरे भगवान की जय भक्त श्रेष्ठ प्रहलाद महाराज की जय गौर प्रमानंद हरि श्री वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रादि देवी सतवताय नमः वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रादि देवी सतवताय नमः वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रादि देवी सतवताय नमः श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की
Bilashi
Radha Krishna Seva Pamo Hey Abhilasi
Radha Krishna Seva Pavo Eya Bilashi
Radha Krishna Seva Pamo Hey Abhilasi
Ye tomara sharan loy tara vancha purna hoy
Tamara Sharanana Taravancha Purna
kripa kori koro tare vrindavana vasi
Mikripa Kori Koro Dore Vrindavana Vasi
Moraeya Vilas Kunj Diyova
Vilas Kunje Yava
Nayane Heri Bosada Yugal Ruparasi
Aminayane Ivasara Jagalaruparasi
Hey Nivedana Daru Sakiranu Gata Koro
Sakira Anugatana
Sevadikara diye Koro Nijadasi
Sevadi Paradi Karanidadasi
Dina Krishna Dase ko ye namora hoy
Dina Krishna Dasa Pae Namora
Dina Krishna Dase ko ye namora hoy
Dina Krishna Dasa Pae Namora
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sada ye navasi
Radha Govinda Preme Sagaye Namasi
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sada ye navasi
Sri Radha Govinda Preme Sagaye Namasi
यानी कानी चा पापानि ब्रह्म हत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Kani kani satma pani brahma tari kani sa Kani kani prana santi prachana pari pari
यानी कानि च पापानि ब्रह्म हत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Kani kani satma pani brahma tari kani sa Kani kani prana santi prachana pari pari
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Krishna तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के शोभा सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणि देवी सतवताय नमो नमः वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के शोभा सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणि देवी सतवताय नमो नमः वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रिय के सभा सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणि देवी सतवताय नमः श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की जय। Oh Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to obtain the service of Shri Radha and Krishna, whoever takes shelter of you as wishes fulfilled, bestow your mercy upon him, you make him a resident of Vrindavan. My desire is that you also give me a residence in pleasure groves of Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my vision, I will always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of the images of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own mad servant. This very fallen and lowly servant of Krishna, please. May I always see me love Shri Radha and Govind, Shri Mati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kristakam ki jai. Jeto Darpanam Mahajanam Bhavamaha Davani Vapanam Shri Yakani Pachandika Vitaranam Javatu Jivanam Anandam Buddhiyajanam Param Punam Dasadam Sarvasvam Param Jayati Sankirtanam Akari Bhavani Sarasati Tatrapika Niyamita Shmayanakara Ekadi Shavakaramahamapi Durgaya Vidishanari Nathurama Dunapi Sunichena Karorapi Krishna Amanina Manadina Kirtaniya Sada Hari Nadhanam Yajanana Sundari Kavitam Vajagari Sakamari Mama Janmani Janmalishwari Bhota Bhakti Bhavati Vai Ayananda Punarangaram Maditama Visamayamamamdo Kripaya Tavada Pankaja Sitaruja Sundaya Mayanam Galarashanaraya Tavadam Galarajaya Puragaya Vichitam Mahu Kada Tavanam Ramanina Bhushyati Yugaya Manimishena Shasharitam Shunyaitam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Viranayami Adishavaadatam Vinastuvam Adashanamatam Vivadova Yadataha Vidatulam Prato Matprana Susayamaha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kristakam ki jai. Glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart with the just accumulated for years, and establishes the fire of conditional life for the period of birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large, for this praise the benediction movement. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. Let us have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies, There's not even hard and fast food for chanting these names. Oh my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. But I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, think oneself about glorious things. Motoring down the street, devoid of all sense of all prestige, and should be ready to offer respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your cause that devotes to service birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yes, some rather I'm following this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, only my eyes will be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name. Only my voice choke up, and only the hairs on my body stand on end at the recitation of your name. O Govinda, feeling your separation, consider the moment to be like 12 years old. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and it should remain so. You sons of me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri 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 Kastakam Ki Jai. There are 10 offenses in the matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that must be avoided. They are as follows. 1. Blaspheme, devoted, dedicated life of propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. Consider names of demigods, Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, to be equal to or independent of the name of Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. Blaspheme the Vedic literature or literatures and pursuance of Vedic version. 5. To consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation of the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in Vedas as fruitive activity, karma kanda. 9. To strike the faultless person by the glorious of holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and maintain material attachments, even of understanding so many instructions on this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prem. Now let us offer our respect. Blessings unto all Vaishnavas, voice of the Lord, righteous like desire trees. They can fulfill the desire of everyone, and they're full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Janmadhyasya yatam vayaritarastaschatir sravigya swarat. Tenne brahma hridaya adhikavaye mojanti jasuraya. Tejo varim vrita jata vinimayo jatra trisargum rasya. Tamnasvena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi.
Masrena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O my Lord, Lord Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva,
O all-pervading personality of Godhead,
all-pervading personality of God,
I offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because He is the absolute
and the
truth,
primeval cause of all causes,
the primeval cause of all
of
causes,
the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes.
the creation, sustenance, destruction, the manifested universe.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all
He is
manifestations,
directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
and he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him.
And He is independent because there is no other cause beyond Him.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji,
It is the only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahma,
the original living being.
the original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion,
By Him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into it.
as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of the material world.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representation,
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations
as one is bewildered by the illusory representation
of water seen on fire or land seen on water.
of water sent with fire, land sent with water.
Only because of him do the material universes,
Only because of Him do the material universe,
temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature,
temporarily manifested by the reaction of the three modes of nature,
appear factual although they're unreal.
appear factual, although they
I
are.
therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna,
I therefore meditate upon Him, Lord Shri Krishna,
who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode,
who is eternally existing in the transcendental,
which is forever free from the illusory representations in the material world.
forever free from illusory representation.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon Him, for He is the absolute truth.
Dharma projita kaitravudra,
Dharma Pujita Kaitavutta,
paramo nirmatsaranam satam,
Namo Nimasaranam Satam,
vedyam vastavam atravastu,
Vedyam Vastavam Astavam,
shividam tapa atrayon mulanam,
Shivadam Tapu Trayam,
Shrimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite,
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni
Kim va prayer Ishvaraha,
Kimva Parir,
Sadyo Hridi Avurudyate Tra, Krite Bihi Sususubhistakshanat, completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
completely rejecting all religious activity which is material motive.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth,
This Bhagavad Puran bounds the highest truth,
which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
which is understandable by those devotees of fully pure in heart.
The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
They have their reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
Such truth uproots the threefold mysteries.
Such truth are root of twofold mystery.
This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in its maturity,
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled with great sage Vyasadeva maturity
is sufficient in itself for God realization.
is sufficient itself for God realization.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scriptures?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam,
As soon as one attends to submissively hear the message of Bhagavatam,
by this culture of knowledge,
by this culture of
the
knowledge,
Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
this rule is established in his heart.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam, sukhamukad amrita dravya samyutam,
Sukhamukadam Riddhava Sangitam,
pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam,
Devata Bhagavatam Sangitam.
muhur ahoraska bhuvibhavakaha. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desired true Vedic literatures.
Desired truth is already
It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
lift of Sri Sukadeva.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Therefore, this food has become even more tasteful.
Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
Although his nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
including liberated souls.
including liberated souls.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna,
Shambhatam Sakata Krishna,
Punya Shravana Kirtana,
Punya Shravana Kirtan,
Hilyantak Stohi Badrani,
Vidyantastu Hiya Bhadrani,
Vidunati Suhitsatam.
Vidu Nati Surisatam.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
To hear about Krishna from very
or to
glorious,
hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
or to hear from it directly through Bhagavad.
is itself righteous activity.
It is self-righteous activity.
And for one who hears about Krishna,
For the one who hears what
Lord Krishna is dwelling in everyone's heart,
Lord Krishna is dwelling within everyone.
acts as a best wishing friend,
Access to the best vision
and purifies the devotee who constantly engaged in hearing of him.
and purify the body constantly engaged in hearing of him.
Nastapresu abhadresu
Nasta praisha bhadrishu
nityam bhagavata sevaya
nityam bhagavata seva
bhagavati tamasloke
bhagavati tamasloke
bhaktir bhavati naistaki.
bhakti bhavati nasti.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge.
In this way, the devotee naturally develops dormant transcendental knowledge.
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
he becomes fixed in devotional service.
Tadarajastamo bhava
Tarajastamo bhava
kamalobhadayaschaye
kamalobhadaya
cheta etairanabhidam stitvam sattve prasidhati.
siddham pravisthiti.
By development of devotional service,
By developing devotional service,
one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance,
one becomes free from all the passion.
and thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
Limited life.
Evam prasanna manaso
Evam prasanama
bhagavat bhakti yogataha bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. When these impurities are wiped away,
when his impurities are wiped
the
away,
candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness,
the candidate remains steady in the position of
becomes enlivened by devotional service,
becomes alive by devotional service.
and understands the science of God perfectly.
And it says the science.
Vidyate hridaya grantis chidyante sarva samsaya shiyante chasya karmani justa eva atmanishvare. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection
Thus the bhakti was severs the heart of the material affection.
and enables one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram,
And everyone to come to the side of some.
understanding of the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna.
Everyone understands.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 1, verse number 19. Tatraikavayavan dhyayed
Tatre kuvayam dhyayet
avyuchinena chetasa
avyochinena chetasa
mano nivisayam yuktva
mano nivasayam yuktva
tata kinchinana smaret
tataki chanana smare
padam tat paramam vishnur
padam tat paramam vishnu
mano yatra prasiddhati. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Thereafter, you should meditate upon the limbs of Vishnu, one after another, without being deviated from the conception of the complete body. Thus, the mind becomes free from all sense objects. There should be no other thing to be thought upon, because the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, is the ultimate truth. The mind becomes completely reconciled in Him only. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Foolish persons, bewildered by the external energy of Vishnu, do not know that the ultimate goal of the progressive search after happiness is to get in touch directly with Lord Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. Vishnu Tattva is an unlimited expansion of different transcendental forms of the personality of Godhead, and the supreme or original form of Vishnu Tattva is Govinda, or Lord Krishna, the supreme cause of all causes. Therefore, thinking of Vishnu or meditating upon the transcendental form of Vishnu, specifically upon Lord Krishna, is the last word on the subject of meditation. This meditation may be begun from the lotus feet of the Lord, one should not, however, forget or be misled from the complete form of the Lord. Thus, one should practice thinking of the different parts of his transcendental body one after another. Here in this verse, it is definitely assured that the Supreme Lord is not impersonal. He is a person. But his body is different from those of conditioned persons like us. Otherwise, meditation beginning from the pranava omkara up to the limbs of the personal body of Vishnu would not have been recommended by Sukadeva Goswami for the attainment of complete spiritual perfection. The Vishnu forms of worship are in great temples of India are not therefore arrangements of idol worship, as they are wrongly interpreted to be by a class of men with a poor fund of knowledge. Rather, they are different spiritual centers of meditation on the transcendental limbs of the body of Vishnu. The worship of all deity in the temple of Vishnu is identical with Lord Vishnu by the inconceivable potency of the Lord. Therefore, a neophyte's concentration or meditation upon the limbs of Vishnu in the temple is contemplated in the revealed scriptures, as contemplated in the revealed scriptures, is an easy opportunity for meditation for persons who are unable to sit down tightly at one place and then concentrate upon pranava omkara, or the limbs of the body of Vishnu, as recommended herein by Sukadeva Goswami, the great authority. The common man can benefit more by meditating on the form of Vishnu in the temple than on the omkara, the spiritual combination of Aum, as explained before. There's no difference between omkara and the forms of Vishnu, but persons unacquainted with the science of the absolute truth try to create dissension by differentiating between the forms of Vishnu and that of omkara. Here it is indicated that the Vishnu form is the ultimate goal of meditation, and as such it is better to concentrate upon the forms of Vishnu than on impersonal omkara. The latter process is also more difficult than the former. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So now we get an idea how far away from the truth the Mayavadis are. They reject the body of Krishna or Vishnu as material. They say there's nothing spiritual about his body. Secondly, they say that in the absolute state of realization, there's no such thing as Krishna, Balaram, Vaikuntha planets, Goloka Vrindavan, the highest planet. They reject all of that, and they meditate on either nothingness like the Buddhists or the light of the Brahma-jyoti, which is coming from the body of Krishna. That means that their whole spiritual quest is a failure from beginning to end, and that they end up in a personless Brahma-jyoti, and eventually they'll fall down because they haven't taken refuge of any Vaikuntha planet. They don't think they exist. And they don't think that Goloka Vrindavan exists. So they have to reject Krishna and Vishnu in order to merge into the impersonal Brahman. It's very similar to a person who gets a ladder to climb up to the first floor or second floor of a building, and then throws the ladder away and thinks they've, in other words, they get stranded. So that ladder is deity worship to help them raise their consciousness from impersonalism to personalism, but they don't understand that. They use the deity as a crutch to attain the Brahman effulgence rather than to attain pure Krishna consciousness. So this is the dead end Mayavad philosophy. Now, to get a more clear understanding of how nefarious and mean the Mayavadis are, and to themselves, number one, and then to others who they're able to convince that their so-called philosophy is valid. Actually, the name Mayavad means they're worshiping something that doesn't exist. They're worshiping something, some idea that is false. So, in a letter Prabhupada wrote to his disciple named Rupanuga, July 24th, 1969, Prabhupada says, Bhakti Shastri is actually recognition, accepting a person that he knows the principles of devotional service. Regarding your question, what is the difference between the spirit souls comprising the Brahma Jyoti and the spirit souls here in Maya? This is a great question. Yes, in 1969. And Prabhupada says, in the Brahma Jyoti, the spirit souls, on account of their impersonal views, are devoid of a body. Exactly like here in Maya, there are ghosts who are devoid of any gross bodies. The ghost, being devoid of a body, he suffers terribly because he is unable to satisfy his senses. The spirit souls in the Brahma Jyoti, although they have no desire for sense gratification, still they feel inconvenience like the ghost, and they fall down again in the Maya's atmosphere and develop a material body. In the Bhagavad, therefore, it is said that persons who are impersonalists and do not develop the dormant devotional attitude, their intelligence is not pure, because for want of a spiritual body, they come down again to the material world. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said by the Lord that the only way of not coming back to the material world is to be promoted to the spiritual planets. For the impersonalist, there's no such assurance of not falling down in the whole Vedic literature. The conclusion is that without developing a spiritual body, without being situated on one of the spiritual planets, the so-called liberation is also illusion, or it is not complete. A spirit soul who falls down from the Brahma Jyoti to the kingdom of Maya may have a chance of associating with a pure devotee, and then he may be elevated to the spiritual planets of Vaikuntha or to Goloka Vrindavan. From the Brahma Jyoti, there is no direct promotion to the spiritual planets, and it is clearly said in the Bhagavatam that such souls fall down patantya adha. Okay, so this is a very wonderful explanation by Prabhupada. Yes, the Brahma Jyoti is made up of infinite number of spirit souls. They're called spiritual sparks. But they don't have material body. They're spirituals, like pencils of light. They're individual souls, right? And in the material world, there is such thing as ghosts. They actually exist. The Bhagavatam admits that such things, such personalities exist. Who is a ghost? Who becomes a ghost? Well, they're usually people who are taking drugs and who, due to their weak will to live, eventually die of overdoses, or they commit suicide because they're so unhappy. It happens every day in America. You have people dying of suicide or dying of overdoses of drugs. Every day it's happening. In fact, look up on the internet how many people died of overdose in 2019. And then how many people died by committing suicide in 2019 in the United States? So when you die due to overdose or die committing suicide, what happens? You become a ghost. What is a ghost? A ghost is a living entity that has only a subtle body and a soul, of course, but not a gross body. And in the subtle body, there are innumerable material desires that they want to satisfy, and they can't do it because they don't have a material body with senses in order to satisfy material desires. You need a body to satisfy your material desires. What does it say? Who? 48,000 what? Suicides or overdoses? 48,000 ghosts in 1 year. In the United States. That's not counting the whole world.
That's figured out 2018.
Okay, 2018. And then how about the suicide? 48,000 is suicide.
2018.
Okay, how about the overdoses of drugs? 70,000 overdoses of drugs, 48,000, right? So that's like 118,000 ghosts in 1 year. And that's not counting the whole world. That's just counting the United States. You know, there's Mexico, all Latin America, there's Canada, and then there's Europe, and there's Australia, and there's Russia, and Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and then the Middle East, and then the Far East. You can just imagine how many ghosts are being produced every year. And then the overdoses, that just adds on to it. So there are millions of ghosts being produced every year. So these are people who have a subtle body covering the soul that's full of material desires, unbelievable number of full material desires, and they can't satisfy any of them. Now in the Brahma-Jyoti, they're infinite. I mean, you might be able to count the ghosts, but you won't be able to count the number of spiritual sparks in the Brahma-Jyoti. They're infinite number. And they're coming in the material world through that Brahma-Jyoti, reflecting off of the sun. But the difference is they don't have material desires. They don't have material like the ghost. But they get bored, say, and they'll eventually fall down to get some material body and pursue different desires that they may have. Okay, so that's very interesting. Now, in this purport, the whole point of this purport is comparing the impersonal path to Godhead with the personal path to Godhead. And usually there are two types of transcendentalists. There are the impersonalists and the devotees. So this is also explained in Bhagavad Gita 12th chapter. And I know we're going to finish what we were discussing yesterday, or at least discuss some more of that, but I just want to finish and make this point. So it says here, 12th chapter, verses 3 and 4, but those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception of absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons, engaged in the welfare of all, at last achieve me. Okay, so this is talking about not the Mayavadis, but this is talking about bona fide impersonalists. Bona fide impersonalists, okay. Prabhupada says, those who do not directly worship the Supreme Godhead, Krishna, but who attempt to achieve the same goal by an indirect process, also ultimately achieved the same goal, Sri Krishna. After many births and deaths, of course, the man of wisdom seeks refuge in me, knowing that Vasudeva is all, is everything. When a person comes to full knowledge after many births, he surrenders unto Lord Krishna. If one approaches the Godhead by the method mentioned in this verse, he has to control the senses, render service to everyone, and engage in the welfare of all beings. It is inferred that one has to approach Lord Krishna. Otherwise, there is no perfect realization. Often there is much penance involved before one fully surrenders unto him. In order to perceive the supersoul within the individual soul, one has to cease the sensual activities of seeing, hearing, tasting, working, etc. Then one comes to understand that the Supreme Soul is present everywhere. Realizing this, one envies no living entity. He sees no difference between man and animal because he sees soul only, not the outer covering. But for the common man, this method of impersonal realization is very difficult, meaning virtually impossible to achieve success. This is not mentioning the Mayavadis now. Mayavadis, there's no way that they're going to ever achieve success because they don't believe that Krishna exists. They don't believe that Vaikuntha planets exist. They don't believe that Goloka exists. And they are constantly blaspheming the Lord. And then it says, Kleso dikaritas chesam avyakta shakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukam dehadvabir avapyate. For those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested, impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. Okay. So, we see that there's no hope for the Mayavadis because they don't understand what the final goal of life is. And they are constantly blaspheming the Lord by saying all kinds of ridiculous things like, oh, he doesn't have a body, and when he comes to the material world, he assumes a material body, and all this nonsense. So the recommended process is given here, where it's said in this verse, where it says one should meditate on the body of Lord Vishnu. Now, why does he say Lord Vishnu a lot? Because Krishna, the Vishnu incarnations are specifically for the material creation, sustenance and maintenance and destruction. And you have 3 Vishnu incarnations, Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshay Vishnu, and Kshirodakshay Vishnu. So those who are engaged in ritualized approach to the Lord, like chanting pranava, omkara, and meditating on the body of Lord Vishnu, they are mainly, you would say, like the Sri Vaishnavas, who mostly are into the ritualized worship of Lord Vishnu, or Narayana. So that is a bona fide process, but it's somewhat difficult and not recommended. Not recommended. And we're going to get to that now. So, but it is a bona fide process. And it's being explained right here. But Prabhupada says the common man can benefit more by meditating on the form of Vishnu in the temple than on the Omkara, the spiritual combination of Aum as explained before. There's no difference between the Omkara and the forms of Vishnu, but persons unacquainted with the science of absolute truth try to create dissension by differentiating between the forms of Vishnu and that of Omkara. Here it is indicated that the Vishnu form is the ultimate goal of meditation, and as such it is better to concentrate upon the forms of Vishnu than on impersonal Omkara. The latter process is also more difficult than the former. Chanting Omkara to attain perfection is more difficult than meditating on the form of Lord Vishnu. Okay, so, but now we'll see we were reading in the 5th chapter, we got up to verse number 22. And the whole point is that Bhagavad Gita helps us aim our attention to the highest perfection that a human being can attain. Just like there's the yoga ladder. So when you go up a ladder, you're going progressively higher. But if you stop at one point and get stuck there, well, you don't reach the top. So there's this yoga ladder, and we're going to hear the different steps on that ladder to the top. Now, the top, by the time you get to the end of the 6th chapter, the top is explained by Krishna, where he says, Yoginam apisarvesam madgatanantaratmana shadamam bhajate yomam same yukta tamomatak. But we're near the end of the 5th chapter only. So we see how Prabhupada is going to gradually take us by the end of the 6th chapter to the top level of perfection in yoga. So it says in text 23, before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. And in the purport he says, if one wants to make steady progress on the path of self-realization, he must try to control the forces of the material senses. There are the forces of talk, force of anger, force of mind. Okay, so we read this yesterday, I'm sorry. Such Goswamis live strictly controlled lives and forego altogether the forces of the senses. Material desires, when unsatiated, generate anger, and thus the mind, eyes, and chest become agitated. Therefore, one must practice to control them before one gives up this material body. One who can do this is understood to be self-realized and is thus happy in a state of self-realization. It is the duty of the transcendentalist to try strenuously to control desire and anger. Desire meaning material desires, not spiritual desires. So then the next verse, one whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the supreme, and ultimately he attains the supreme. So what happens inside? Well, you can understand the existence of the individual soul, the jiva, and you can understand the existence of the Paramatma, the super soul, which is an expansion of Krishna as Shirodakshai Vishnu. Unless one is able to relish happiness from within, how can one retire from the external engagements meant for deriving superficial happiness? A liberated person enjoys happiness by factual experience. He can, therefore, sit silently at any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. Such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This state is called Brahmabhuta, attaining which one is assured of going back to Godhead, back to home. Okay, so what's interesting, what we just read says, he can therefore sit silently at any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. What does that mean exactly? Enjoying the activities of life from within. Well, let's say we have Janmashtami celebration in the temple, and everyone is preparing for it for at least 2 weeks, and the ladies are making so many flower arrangements. Pujaris are anxiously awaiting the new outfit to arrive, oftentimes at the last minute. And the devotees are cooking sweets and all kinds of special preparations for Krishna. And there's great anticipation, right? And then the day comes, and it's a glorious day, and thousands of people come to see the deity. They're beautifully directed, and there's all these displays to help people remember Krishna. And the cows are there, and the goats, and there's so many arrangements are made, parking arrangements, police car, and policeman. Well, it's exciting, you know. And then all of a sudden, it's 12 o'clock, and everyone's euphoric and jumping up and down, and chanting Hare Krishna at the top of their lungs. And then after that, there's a big feast because there was fasting all day. And then the next day, we have to wake up early again for Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. So the whole thing is intense and it's transcendental because we're so involved in thinking about Krishna and planning to please the Lord and thinking about Prabhupada that we don't have time for nonsense. At least for most of the devotees, that's the case. So then one can think about that because that is, what is that? It is what's said here. It is sitting in one place and enjoying from within. Sit silently at any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. You see, so we're meditating on those transcendental pastimes, and that can be a lifetime of meditation. You see, so it's very important having these festivals. It's very important that everyone participate in them because it gives you a taste of transcendental life. And therefore, such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This state is called Brahmabhuta, attaining which one is assured of going back to Godhead, back to home. So the more of these experiences that we can experience, the more we have something to preoccupy our mind when we're sitting silently. And not, instead of thinking of what's my next sense gratification, we're thinking of all these wonderful pastimes that we have experienced and given us a taste of transcendental life. Then the next verse says, those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme. So we covered this yesterday also. And so this is a wonderful purport. Only a person who is fully in Krishna consciousness can be said to be engaged in welfare work for all living entities. When a person is actually in the knowledge that Krishna is the fountainhead of everything, then when he acts in the spirit, in that spirit, he acts for everyone. The sufferings of humanity are due to forgetfulness of Krishna as the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend. Therefore, to act to revive this consciousness within the entire human society is the highest welfare work. One cannot be engaged in such first-class welfare work without being liberated in the Supreme. A Krishna-conscious person has no doubt about the supremacy of Krishna. He has no doubt because he is completely freed from all sins. This is the state of divine love. So this is something we should meditate on. This is the 5th chapter, 25th verse, the purport. A person engaged only in ministering to the physical welfare of human society cannot factually help anyone. Temporary relief for the external body and the mind is not satisfactory. So that eliminates all the psychologists, all the social workers, all the so-called philanthropists, this foundation and that foundation. It eliminates all of them because they're just trying to serve the body of the people, or maybe a little bit psychological help, the mind of the people, but it doesn't solve their problem. Temporary relief of the external body and the mind is not satisfactory. The real cause of one's difficulties in the hard struggle for life may be found in one's forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Lord. When a man is fully conscious of his relationship with Krishna, he is actually a liberated soul, although he may be in the material tabernacle. So, like, for example, if someone is starving and you give them some vegetables and grains, well, that'll maintain them for a day or two or three, maybe 1 week, but then they'll run out of the grains and the vegetables. But if you teach him how to grow vegetables and grains, then he can maintain himself the rest of his life, you see, and how to preserve them over winter and this thing and that thing, and how to, fertilize the land and how to attract water by chanting Hare Krishna and so forth. And all of a sudden, you solve this problem for life. Whereas just simply giving him the vegetables and grains, you solve his problem for a few days only. So if we teach people why we're actually suffering, what's the reason we're actually suffering? What's the reason we're caught in this vicious cycle of birth and death, old age and disease? And then explain the easy process by which a person can be liberated from this whole thing. And in the process of being liberated, they'll be able to live very peacefully without unnecessary agitation and lust and greed and all that. Then that's the solution. That is the solution. And therefore, the end and the means are one in Krishna consciousness. Because the means to attain this liberation is devotional service, and the end is eternal devotional service. So the ends and the means are the same in Krishna consciousness. And you'll see in almost all other endeavors, the end and the means are not the same. So now the next verse says, and this is a very important verse, shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence. The transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated. So this is a state of samadhi that's achieved by usually what's called Kriya Yoga. And you have to suspend the inward and outward breaths within in other words, you stop breathing. And controlling the mind always, and keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows. Now, if you think you can do this, you're my. I would really be surprised. You think you can do this, Prabhu? I know I can't do it. So Prabhupada says, being engaged in Krishna consciousness, one can immediately understand one's spiritual identity. We're the eternal servant of Krishna. And then one can understand the Supreme Lord by means of devotional service. When one is well situated in devotional service, one comes to the transcendental position, qualified to feel the presence of the Lord in the sphere of one's activity. This particular position is called liberation in the Supreme. So now, you see, Prabhupada's talking about this mystical Kriya Yoga or Astanga Yoga, right? But yet he's writing about Krishna consciousness, you see. So now after this, that's the first paragraph of the purport. Now the second paragraph, he says, after explaining the above principles of liberation in the Supreme, the Lord gives instruction to Arjuna as to how one can come to that position by the practice of the mysticism or yoga known as Astanga Yoga, which is divisible into an eightfold procedure called Yama, Niyama, Asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharma, dhyana, and samadhi. 8 steps. So, now, first, he starts off by talking about pure Krishna consciousness, and then he says, but here in this verse, Krishna is explaining this Astanga Yoga to Arjuna. Right? In the 6th chapter, now, this Astanga Yoga is bona fide. It's not that it's not bona fide. But how many people can do it? There, by the way, there's a school of Astanga Yoga in Seattle, in the Capitol Hill. You know. But how many people can do it? Okay, so in the 6th chapter, the subject of yoga is explicitly detailed, and at the end of the 5th, it is only preliminarily explained. One has to drive out the sense objects such as sound, touch, form, taste, and smell by the pratyahara process in yoga, and then keep the vision of the eyes between the 2 eyebrows. Then you would be cross-eyed, as they say in English. Anyway, it says, and then the vision of the eyes between the 2 eyebrows, and concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed eyelids. There's no benefit in closing the eyes altogether, because then there is every chance of falling asleep. Just like people fall asleep during the class, right? They just sort of like this, and all of a sudden their head goes down. You know? And then you hear some noise like that, and then all of a sudden they wake up again. You know? So there's no benefit in closing the eyes altogether, because then there's every chance of falling asleep. And Prabhupada used to tell devotees who would fall asleep in class to stand up. You know. Nor is there benefit, and then sometimes devotees would stand up and then fall down. They would fall asleep standing up, and then they fall down, you know. And everybody would look at them, they'd be all embarrassed. One has to drive out the sense object. Okay, so there's no benefit in closing the eyes altogether, because then there's every chance of falling asleep. Nor is there benefit in opening the eyes completely, because then there is the hazard of being attracted by sense objects. So now just imagine, to do yoga like this, which is a bona fide process, you can't open the eyes completely, you can't close them completely. You have to keep them half closed, like that. Can you do that?
I'll have headache.
Huh?
I started having headache if you do that.
You started doing that?
Headache. No. If I try to do that, I start having headache.
Oh yeah, you have a headache, yeah, of course. It's uncomfortable, just keeping your eyes half closed or half open. You see, it's not easy. And then it says, the breathing movement is restrained within the nostrils by neutralizing the upward and down moving air within the body. Another thing you have to do is swallow your tongue, by the way. So there's no intake by the throat, and then there's no intake by the nostrils. So just imagine how hard that is. By practice of such yoga, one is able to gain control over the senses, refrain from outward sense objects, and thus prepare oneself for liberation in the Supreme. Yeah, you probably would die in the process. Kriya Yoga is extremely dangerous, and then this Astanga Yoga is extremely hard. Okay, but now look, now the first paragraph he spoke about pure Krishna consciousness, and then this long paragraph in the middle, he's talking about what the verse is about, right? And now the last paragraph, listen to what he says. The yoga process helps one become free from all kinds of fear and anger, and thus feel the presence of the supersoul in the transcendental situation. In other words, Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of executing yoga principles. Now he explains what the purpose is of this Astanga Yoga, but then he goes in another direction, the same direction he's in as the first paragraph. He says, Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of executing yoga principles. This will be thoroughly explained in the next chapter, in the 6th chapter. A Krishna conscious person, however, being always engaged in devotional service, does not risk losing his senses to some other engagement. This is a better way of controlling the senses than by the Astanga yoga. So a little bit later, he's going to say, here he said, Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of yoga. But later on, he's going to say Ashtanga yoga is far inferior to Krishna consciousness. Okay. So then, and we'll stop with this next verse, and then we'll continue tomorrow in the same path. The next verse is a famous verse, Bhaktaram Yagatapasam Sarvaloka Maheswaram Sridam Sarvabhutanam Yatva Mam Santim Richati. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So you have to know three things to have peace and become free of material suffering. Krishna is Bhaktaram, the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices. Krishna is Maheshwara, the ultimate proprietor of everything, including our body, our mind, our senses, and everything in the universe. And Sridham, he's the best friend of the living entity. So in the purport, Prabhupada says, the conditioned souls within the clutches of illusory energy are all anxious to attain peace in the material world. Yes. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Right? Every time you finish the puja, everyone does Shantipat. Right? Is that right? Yeah. So everyone wants Shanti. They want peace, because without peace, you can't have happiness. And in fact, this is a verse in Bhagavad Gita, the 2nd chapter, that says, Nasti buddhira yuktasya nacha yuktasya bhavana nacha bhavya tak santasya kutasukam. 2nd chapter, 66th verse. One who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there's no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So peace is a prerequisite to having happiness. Let's say you lived in Iraq during the Iraq War and afterwards when ISIS came. Do you think there'd be any peace? No, not at all. There was, you know, the Iraq War was a mistake, a big mistake, and it completely destabilized all the Middle East. All the countries got into difficulty. They had ISIS and Al Qaeda, and there was killing and fighting, and it just kept going on for years, right? And it was all because of that Iraq War. Of course, there were reasons why there was the Iraq War, but it was overdone. It was way extremely done. It should not have happened like that. They could have stopped Saddam Hussein from attacking Saudi Arabia. That was the reason why they had the Iraq War, because he attacked Kuwait and took over the country. And then next he was going to attack Saudi Arabia, you know, and the oil. God, you know, never attack Saudi Arabia, because it's the main supplier, one of the main suppliers of oil in the world, and the United States, and funder of the United States. So, you know, Bush went in there and wiped out Saddam Hussein. But then it gave rise to Al Qaeda and then ISIS, and then years and years of terrible suffering of the people there. Not only in Iraq, but throughout the whole Middle East. Okay, so you have to have peace in order to have happiness. And you can't have peace unless you have some relationship with Krishna. So there's a direct, let's say, line between peace, happiness, and Krishna consciousness. Okay, so it says here that the conditioned souls within the clutches of illusory energy are all anxious to attain peace in the material world, but they do not know the formula for peace, which is explained in this part of the Bhagavad Gita. The greatest peace formula is simply this: Lord Krishna is the beneficiary of all human activities. Men should offer everything to the transcendental service of the Lord, because he is the proprietor of all planets and the demigods thereon. No one is greater than he. He is greater than the greatest of the demigods, Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. In the Vedas, Svatasvatara Upanishad, the Supreme Lord is described as Tam Ishwaranam Paramam Maheshwaram. So this is another important verse in the 3rd chapter, and we'll end with this and continue again tomorrow. And this says, this verse says, Tam Ishwaranam Paramam Maheshwaram Tam Devatanam Paramam Shadir Daivatam Patim Patitam Patinam Paramam Parastat Vidana Devam Bhuvanesham Idyam Natashikaryam Karanam Chavidyate Natas Samas Chabhyatikas Chadrishyate Parasya Shakti Vividai Vashriyate Swabhaviki Jnanabala Kriyacha. So these are 2 verses from the Svatasvatara Upanishad, and 6th chapter, 7th and 8th verse. And it says, the Supreme Lord is the controller of all other controllers, and he is the greatest of all the diverse planetary leaders. Everyone is under his control. All entities are delegated with particular power only by the Supreme Lord. They are not supreme themselves. He is also worshipable by all demigods and is the supreme director of all directors. Therefore, he is transcendental to all kinds of material leaders and controllers and is worshipable by all. There is no one greater than him, and he is the supreme cause of all causes. He does not possess bodily form like that of an ordinary living entity. There is no difference between his body and his soul. He is absolute. All his senses are transcendental. Any one of his senses can perform the action of any other sense. Therefore, no one is greater than him or equal to him. His potencies are multifarious, and thus his deeds are automatically performed as a natural sequence. This is in the Svatasvatara Upanishad. It's extremely important verses. And if we understand this, then we free ourselves from Maya, and the rest of our life we engage in Krishna consciousness. Because this is, like I said, Krishna consciousness is aiming at the highest goal attainable, possibly attainable by a human being, and that is pure love of Krishna. So we'll stop right there and continue some more, because this explains definitively the difference between impersonalism and personalism, and especially it condemns Mayavad impersonalism. And it proves that it's virtually impossible in this age to attain perfection by bona fide impersonalism. See? And Mayavad impersonalism, no way at all. It's nonsense. It's actually a blasphemy of Krishna. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Therefore, Prabhupada's pranam mantra is Namaha Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Shmati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarni. Prabhupada's mission is specifically to come to the Western countries and defeat impersonalism. Not only in the Western countries, but in India also. Because this thing is ruining society, ruining Sanatana Dharma, ruining everything. And it leads to a dead end. It doesn't lead anywhere good. Haribol.